Hello. This is my colleague Juan Vela, and my name is Bernd Constant. Together we've got almost 25 years of IT security experience, worked in various security operation centers, and have experience with virtually every part of the network. So we bring a vast knowledge of how to best practices, workflow, and how the entire SOC keeps on working. We're part of a larger company, CSG International, which does a lot of orchestration work around the world. And we've just launched a new branch, which is IT security, which we're presenting right here with a new concept of orchestration or automation of your workflow. So we're going to go over an introduction, then challenges in the current cybersecurity threat, and then show you what the new approach is, sort of the next-gen security operations center approach and how that actually works together. Currently, cybersecurity is a hygiene factor in many organizations, which hygiene factor means it's a necessary evil in order to secure your network. Right? Often cybersecurity is an overlooked fact until actually you have a breach inside of your network. Quickly, this can take over prices of millions of dollars, and therefore you have to put in the right investments inside of there. Security operations centers have been therefore arming themselves with various tools around their infrastructure, their components, and so forth. This has been turning into a more siloed approach for everything that's going on. So you have various teams that are experts in one tool, maybe other teams in another tool, and then if you actually want to take some actions, you have to go through a third team and fourth team. All this means that you can't respond fast enough if you have a new attack happening, right? What if you have Heartbeat coming onto your network, a new 0-day, you're actually locked down with your daily tasks and don't actually have the resources available in order to reshift your entire security posture. So one of the items that we're going to be discussing is the current cybersecurity challenges, and Juan Vela is going to go into that. I think you need this. There you go.
Bom dia. So I believe one of the earlier presentations actually covered a lot of the more current incidents that we're dealing with and a lot of the challenges that we face when actually trying to respond and mitigate to those threats. Recently, Symantec actually reported that there was a 42% increase in targeted attacks in the United States. And this is very pertinent in terms of just the ever-evolving landscape that we have to deal with and how do we actually respond to it. And along the same vein, we have a 400% increase in mobile malware. So the landscape is just expanding continuously. What used to be a very concise environment that we would have to protect now is expanding into the mobile realm. So there's a lot of different scenarios that now we have to address. So as attacks are increasing, what's the biggest issue now that organizations are facing? Data loss. There's a 300% rise in records compromised in the last 8 or 9 years. What does this mean? In terms of data, it's everything that an organization might hold and want to protect, from just payment records. Personal information is a big one that I think everyone has a lot of concern with. Credentials to the environment. How do these attackers maintain their foothold? How do they get in? How do they actually exfiltrate all the data that they're most targeting? And in terms of enterprises and organizations, it's the proprietary information, the information and secrets that they want to hold close to the chest. They don't want leaking. All that is basically being targeted and exfiltrated. And what does this mean in terms of cost to these organizations and enterprises? In the United States, an incident in annual cost across the nation right now is averaging anywhere between $20 and $140 billion. To an individual enterprise means an average cost per incident, $10 million is what they're having to incur in terms of an impact from an actual cyber compromise. Now the threat landscape, what's evolving? Just the complexity, sophistication, and the introduction of what most organizations are now trying to defend against, which is the Advanced Persistent Threat, or the APT. And I think of biggest concern here is this last bullet. It's how quickly 0 days are actually being weaponized. From public disclosure, what used to take days, weeks for it to actually show up as a part of an attack is now taking hours to a day to actually show up in a lot of packaged attacks. So again, cybersecurity is getting more and more complex. The layered defense approach that was really common when I started my career was rather successful initially because the environment most organizations had at that point, it was static. A lot of your workforce, they were physically located within your organization or enterprise. So you were able to layer your defenses along the perimeter. You would have firewalls, IDSs. You didn't have to account for what you have to account now with a mobile workforce and outsourced resources where you had very siloed protection schemes. Now you have to account for remote users and the outsourced enterprises that you're actually working with, where one of the recent breaches in the US Target, the initial exploitation vector was the fact that they targeted a partner or a vendor, and then they worked their way into the enterprise through that vendor, gained their foothold, and then as soon as they had that, they basically had the keys to the kingdom. And so what this onion diagram basically is depicting is that layered approach, right? We want to make sure we account for protecting the external segments, the internal segments, host, the application layer, and the most critical piece today is the data layer. And being able to make sense of all of the point solutions we now have to deal with. It's quite a massive undertaking at this point to not only invest in the technology to detect, but also to make sense of what's coming out of that. So in terms of an operational environment, when I say operational environment, I think most of this presentation is really focused on a security operations center. Sorry. Thought I was loud enough. So what I was saying is, in terms of the focus of our presentation, for the most part, it's the security operations center. It's where I spent 8 years of my life initially in my career. So there's a lot to account for, especially with the evolving landscape. There's tons of processes that we have to account for now where your dedicated human capital, your resource, your analyst, has to be able to query and dig into not only your network sensors, the alerts that actually come through, but you're going to have business intelligence resources within your environment that you're going to want to query to help round out any given event. Most organizations at this point, they've heavily invested in SIM technologies, right? That's the first attempt at making sense of all of the point solutions and technologies you've invested into. You'll have, it's kind of the first line of defense. It's what most analysts initially focus on, where that's where all of your events initially come in and you respond from. The only issue that it doesn't address, that today we're having a hard time addressing, is the fact that once you have an event, what then? What do? You're going to have to log into every single point solution to mitigate an attack, to respond to an attack. And not only is it on the technology side, but there's a process side that's really heavy and a drain in terms of resources on analysts. They have to track, log, and document everything that they do for any given event in most organizations, using their tickets, updating them, making sure that they capture everything that they need to capture, obviously for audit purposes, performance metrics. So again, that's something else that just in terms of daily tasks, it's very repetitive, very monotonous. It's something that can be addressed potentially with a new technology. So in terms of the incident response cycle, so this is very poignant in terms of what we're trying to speak to. IDG reported that typically it takes hours to detect and diagnose any given event. So, and you can see in the actual chart here, in reality, detection takes hours, but the actual diagnosis and initial response to any given event could take between days, and in terms of actual resolution, it might even bleed into weeks in terms of commonality there. So what is it that consumes an analyst's time? And just to reiterate again, rarely does it take just one single device that an analyst has to log into and actually make sense of to be able to respond to any given event. They have to be able to interface with each point solution separately. And that manual process is tedious, very time consuming. And beyond just the time consuming nature of it, once you introduce a new point solution for any given threat, that analyst now has to get trained. So in terms of available resources, what they have to have expertise on, it's always expanding, always growing. And not only that, with different roles and groups within any given organization and responsibilities, for example, the separation between your security operations center and your network operations center, some of the tools that they've invested in are often going to be siloed in terms of who is actually owning those devices, who is authorized to make changes on those devices. So a lot of times there has to be a path for escalation in terms of initial detection. They have to push it off to yet another group that actually owns those devices and what they need to do. And we just wanted to highlight just a very light example of just what any given incident, what you might actually have to talk to within an operations center, right? You're going to have to log within your ticketing system. You're going to have your event originate within your SIM. And then in terms of actually responding to the threat, you're going to be logging into basically every point solution that's relevant to that given incident, which in this case, we just highlighted FireEye. So for detection, initial detection, Cisco would be your perimeter devices, your network infrastructure, where you might actually have to deploy your changes. Windows Active Directory, so in terms of business intelligence or kind of painting the picture of who was actually affected, you would query that solution basically to get identity management or just details of any given end user. And then for notifications, then you're going to have to send out all your notifications, escalations through Exchange, or you might have another technology you might want to leverage in terms of forensics, network forensics like RSA NetWitness. So this time issue, resource issue that we're speaking of in terms of the analysts, what is it they're actually doing? So in terms of just the given process, we just highlighted a number of tasks that they might have to do. They might have to request approvals. Email notifications might have to go out. Each one of those point solutions, they're going to have to check, query, export data out, log it in a ticket. If there's forensics involved, they're going to have to hit every endpoint that was affected. And then requesting the actual process of remediation. If it doesn't involve them, they're going to have to wait, do the escalations manually. So and this is just tip of the iceberg in terms of what any given process or any given operations center might have to deal with. So how do we address this? Is it more people? That's basically the biggest investment I saw initially within a SOC. We went from a team of 8 to all of a sudden a team of 50, sharing duties. Or do we just invest in more screens? More screens means more point solutions, but does it address the problem? No. You're still having to put up every single point solution in every screen. So in terms of just efficiency, it looks great, doesn't help. So now we get to the meat of the presentation. Bernd, you got it?
If you could do the flipping. Yeah, you can move to the next one. So we're looking at a time for a new approach, right? So you're familiar with IT security. There's all these different solutions that are out there. There's always these new attack vectors that are coming through. When you take a look at the life of a security operations analyst, all of that work right now is still very mundane. So where we can actually get efficiencies in response time, accuracy on evaluating events, is in order to bring in some orchestration or automation inside of some of these fields. So most of the organizations already have real-time analysis monitoring on your network, right? In the open source world, this might be a Snort, or you might go to SourceFire or different other tools. The series of tools that are out there are always changing, right? So I've been in this field for 12 years right now, and the vendors come and go, or there's a new product that comes out, right, which is now #1, then it goes to the next one and so forth. What's been happening recently is some of these vendors are tying some of their tools together, but not the entire flow of the SOC analyst. So you might have a FireEye on your network, but you might not have it inline on your email. You have other types of point solutions inside of your systems. Once you actually also come into application monitoring, these tools tend to be more siloed. So if you take a look at a web application firewall or so forth, in most organizations, you'll actually have the web team actually maintain those web application firewalls and not your security operations center. So now if you have to make some quick changes to some of these devices from the Security Operations Center, typically this involves you sending out an email. In more advanced organizations, you might create a remedy ticket or some other ticketing system in the intermediary. We've saw at several of our customer sites where just the manual process of assigning tickets and so forth can actually take them 20 minutes just to copy paste data from multiple systems into one. And this is not including coffee breaks or anything like that. This is very mundane work, right? And IT security specialists are very smart people. So you want to actually leverage them and push them over to tasks that are actually a little bit more meaningful so they can move on to the network. When you take a look at, when you take a look at the cybersecurity response cycle, there's areas here where there's a sensing portion inside of your network, right? There has to be a device in order to collect the event or make sense out of something. So there's a lot of tools right now on the market that can A, sense, and B, maybe even make sense of some of these events inside of there. Many of these are actually very manually driven and set up. So if you take a look at a security incident event management system, which is a system that collects logs from your entire network enterprise and you put it inside of there. These systems typically just come out of the box. And then the main question is, what are you actually interested in monitoring? What are you actually interested in looking? So then you have a whole dedicated team that is just there just to configure these devices. All this is nice and good but then when it comes over to the actual incident response cycle, the security analyst, they need to now go into multiple different tools in order to do their work, right? So you've got the event enrichment, right? Which means you'll take an event from, for instance, a SIM, let's say an ArcSite, or an RSA Net Witness tool. And then the first thing you're actually going to be doing is doing more queries inside of that tool. Typically, you'll find that security operations centers actually get locked down with 60% of their time with about only a half a dozen to a dozen types of security events. So it's a very repeatable process. So what we're saying is the area that you have the most expertise of actually optimizing the security operations center is everything that the human currently touches. So this is the enrichment area. So a security operation analyst might go get a snort event saying there's malware on your network or there's command and control communication happening. The first thing you'll actually do is you'll actually verify that website by going to a site like VirusTotal, RebRoot, or something other than that, and just verify, is this actually a hostile site? Then you'll start operating your standard operation procedures, and some organizations call the Run Book or Red Book. We like to refer to it as the cyber playbook. Once your security operations center becomes more and more mature, your standard operating procedures will get hashed out and you'll become more efficient inside of this. What we're proposing that you need to do is put it into a system and tie all these tools together, because there is no need for training each one of your staff members in each one of the activities if this can all be bubbled up and presented to the analyst. So when you take a look at what takes so long, right, the hours just to decide if this is a security event, threat, or something like that, it's mostly part of the sense and make sense activities. So if you can minimize that, that means your threat to exposure of the actual malware on your system is now minimized. And many organizations, the shields up approach of, hey, okay, we found something on your network, now let's block it, takes often days. I was working in a other organization in the past where they were doing their firewall blocks on every Friday at 8 p.m. So if you detect malware on Tuesday, you have to wait until Friday, 8 p.m. in order to actually block the malware. Now there's interim solutions inside of there, so they also had an IPS device where they could also block this. But the thing is, the IPS device is not, it can block traffic, but if you overload it, your performance goes down. You'll have other issues with the IPS device happening. So in some instances, you really want to block it on the firewall. The only way you can actually do this in real time and actually come up with really cool use cases where you could automatically, let's say, disconnect a user as soon as you detect malware on their box, or automatically block this IP address. This currently you can't get done with less than an hour in most organizations. And that's when they're prepping for it. So through orchestration, we're hoping in order to reduce the time of detection of incidents until it actually comes through. So move on to the next one. So I have here sort of a manual workflow for cyber defense, which is typically found inside of enterprises. So at the bottom stack here is your security tools that you currently have. So the first one is your security incident event management tool. This typically is your top layer stack inside of your security operations center. In many SOC environments, if you see it with the big monitors, there's always an ArcSight or an RSA Net Witness or some other tool just displaying the latest events, right? Then you might have another team that's actually looking up for threat intelligence. So these people go to other websites, find out what the new hostile list is. Let's say they go to SANS Threat Stream. There's also other commercial providers that might also give you the list of newest malware websites, infected hosts, and new signatures that you need to upload inside your system, right? Then you also often have custom data sources that you put inside of here, and you need to combine all of these two together. So when a typical security event currently happens, you have the event collection done manually. So you have an active channel inside of ArcSight where you have the latest streams. And as soon as an event comes in, then your analyst has to manually start triaging it. In most cases, this means he needs to go into another system, create a ticket, then do the research, copy paste everything inside of there, and move on to the next step, which is then the event analysis. The event analysis can also take hours in order to complete, depending on the complexity. Right, this is where sometimes the first level incident response analysts will just take a look at the event, determine this might be malware, but so now the machine is now infected on a desktop on your network. So the first thing you'll actually have to do is now collect forensics investigations from there. So if you have malware on a Windows laptop or desktop, the first things you'll want to do is get the registry keys. You would want to get the Windows prefetch files, where you want to get the browser history and anything else that might be pertinent to this, right? Anything executed on a Windows box will initiate from the prefetch file, so therefore you know if malware actually triggered on the machine. Once they actually have that information, then they can do further analysis, right? So what I just described here is moving from one team inside of your security operations center to another team, just to collect all this information together. And then the documentation is not always there. One of the key factors also, when you provide your security operations team the access to actually be able to download prefetch files on any machine, which means you're giving them desktop admin rights. So they can log into any machine on the network. There's many cases that I've been in customer sites where there was actually a breach of data where some analysts actually stole some credit card information from end users because they had these privileges. There is no complete audit trail of what these analysts are currently doing. Right, so once that is done, then they have to look up what the courses of action is and determine the best approach for each one of these actions. All of these activities currently are then siloed inside of the Security Operations Center. And when you actually really need to do some blocks, in many cases, you're sending the blocks over to the network operations team, right? So this is reconfiguring firewalls and so forth. I've seen in most organizations this is still being done manually via email, requesting something to be happened. The problem comes once you actually need to trace back the block to the actual incident then afterwards. There is no complete audit trail of an event hitting in. Yes, we say we do the analysis. It turned up as a malicious site on VirusTotal, and then we send over the block. A year from now, when you're taking a look at the firewall policy rules, it's really hard to combine it back to the initial request and why did we even block this in the past. So I've been in environments where we actually had to go clean up the firewall rules, and it was a daunting task because there was no direct tie back to which ticket was actually issued and what the actual reason was. So when we take a look at security orchestration, we're basically saying put all of these tools together, and just make it a lot easier for your analysts to come through, right? Where we want to have the analysts is in the decision-making part, right? The final part, which actually requires the brains, the reason why they got hired, and put it all through. So if we can already put together each one of these daily routines that are coming through. So let's say, again, the example of malware analysis. So let's say we get a snort event saying there is possible malware on your network. The first thing you want to do is collect the prefetch file, the registry keys, anything that might be pertinent to that issue on side of the machine, and actually present this back to the analysts so they have everything at their fingertips at once. Now there's a whole bunch of tools that are specialized for each one of these areas, right? The problem lies is if you have one tool that's really good at this one area over here, but it doesn't do anything for the other area, then you have a dispersed network, and you will never be able to see your entire security posture inside of your network. And it's also virtually impossible to really do a shields up approach when everything is coming through. So when you tie out all these tools together, you'll see that there is great efficiency, and you can actually maneuver and focus on more meaningful tasks inside of there. The key aspect when you're talking about automation inside of IT security is the human in the loop, right? You still need brains in order to put it in here. When I first started in IT security, Checkpoint Firewall actually started initiating automatic blocks based on policy that are coming through, sort of the pretense of an IPS device. What started happening is that the hackers started spoofing IP addresses, and then you would DDoS your entire network, right? So I've been in situations where these rules were just poorly configured, and then before you know it, nobody had internet access and got into the environment. So when you're talking about automation in IT security, you have to be cognizant that the human has to be able to make the final decision. And you also have to have multiple layers of approvals for certain actions that you want to put in there. Now, putting an approval in the manual sense, or how it's currently done on some infrastructures, can take hours or days in order to do, right? What we're saying is automate that process, make it smartphone enabled or something like that, just so you can automatically block these items through. The other item is, once you actually put in security automation or orchestration inside of here, you can also do custom actions on any one of your security enabled devices. So I've been working in a lot of security operations center, and the more mature that they actually get, the more they start scripting and creating custom code, right? So some of these orchestrations you can sort of glue together, tie together, and put together. The big problem when you have that, it means you have one or two good coders like myself on your team that will put it all together. The problem happens, what happens when that person actually leaves the organization? Or how do you do your versioning control? How do you check your code debugging or something like that? If something goes wrong and you're creating a script in order to update object classes inside of firewalls, you can actually be in a very sticky situation, to say the least. But if you put in a powerful orchestration tool that will do that for you, and then just have a drag and drop type interface, then that is the best method of actually doing it, right? So with orchestration, you can go from small to large and be able to do the full security in-depth approach. I found in many organizations that when they actually start blocking on the firewalls, they typically only block on the perimeter. Now, when you're taking a look at US government organizations, they're taking a stance of defense in depth, right? So you don't only want to block on your perimeter firewalls, you want to block on every single firewall that you have inside of your network, right? This means that if a hacker comes in through another vector, so the example here is Target, a big retailer in the United States, one was mentioning it before, one of their vendors actually got compromised that had direct access to their network. Now, if Target would have had a defense in-depth approach, they would have blocked traffic on every single firewall. But since this vendor was already connected inside of their network, there was no chance that they could even have blocked all of the traffic inside of there. Right, so I think we're actually a little bit fast. Right. So with security orchestration, what we're trying to do is a unified approach to your SIEM. right? So if you put security orchestrator inside of your network, you'll be able to query SIM events, get those as a feed coming in, or any type of tool that you have in the network, and automatically enrich all of this data inside of your inside of the event that you're currently triaging. Tying all these tools together and just making it easy basically puts it into a mode where once it's configured, it's a plug-and-play approach, and you can onboard any analyst with almost no training for the individual tools, and just put them into the tool. It will automatically show them what the workflow is and integration. So this is a full optimization of your security posture, right? The ultimate goal that we're actually trying to achieve with security orchestration is actually a reduction of your incident response cycle. If you can put your shields up within a couple minutes, you have substantial gains inside of your network. We have one customer that is currently has a use case for VPN users, right? So the use case is they've got a firewall on the network, and they detect command and control communications on their network. And then the process of them actually taking that user off of the VPN is currently taking them almost an hour to complete, right? And I say that sort of half-heartedly because that hour to complete was when the analysts actually knew that they were being timed doing it, right? So that doesn't account for taking a coffee break or anything like that, which means that you have at least 1 hour from the detection side to actually until you can actually take them off the network. So when you can reduce that, that means your threat posture is much improved. So that's where we're trying to optimize the performance. So just imagine if you could automatically detect this and then automatically block the IP, then you put the human in the loop in order to make sure that this is valid, and then you can actually disconnect the user from the VPN. You can automatically create emails. You might also automatically want to scan the machine in order to make sure that the virus checker is up to date and so forth. Once the machine's off the network, then you can already initiate other workflows that you want to put inside of there. Each one of these activities currently takes a lot of time in order to get remediation inside of there. Right? The other key aspect of orchestration is as well is the full audit trail. There's many issues, and when you're starting to deploy a security operations center, the reason why there's often a separation of duties between the SOC and the network team is because the network team doesn't trust the security team in order to maintain their firewalls, right? They've been putting in a lot of time and effort just to set these up. And so they're very hesitant in order for having a junior analyst actually make any changes on it. If you can actually expose the full command set that's actually inside of there, and also make sure that it's fully auditable, then you can actually bridge that gap and be able to have the two teams communicate and collaborate together. And I think that's pretty much it. So the key issues that we're trying to address here is we've got an increased volume and complexity of cyber attacks. We want to be able to reshift the focus from the daily tasks, which take up 60 to 80% of the daily operations. So the Security Operations Center can now focus on the zero-day attacks, where you actually have to reconfigure some of your posture or something like that. So we want to be able to reduce the impact of items, right? Then also, we want to actually sort of take your analysts and kind of put them on steroids, right? If you have a more junior analyst and he doesn't have all the information or has the know-how on how to, for instance, pull a packet capture and do some of the initial analysis to find out if your malware is actually moving laterally on the network or it actually has like command and control, you can now provide these types of commands to the analyst, and they can just simply, with a touch of a button, actually already trigger some of these investigations. And the key item is you want to be able to unite your entire security environment. It's very hard to get a full visual in depth of what your security posture is inside of the network. So you would want to put all your tools together and actually know if there's anything happening. Right. And the last item here is actually just digitizing your playbook. Too many security centers that I went to, you've got a team of security operations staff, and everybody is doing it a little bit differently. This is not only not efficient, but it's also not a repeatable process. So you might have one analyst that's actually doing it a little bit better than other analysts, and you want to be able to make sure that your process is fully optimized for optimal performance. And I think that's kind of it. So just one slide sort of what we sort of do and what our kind of like our tool is. So what we're doing is we're a security orchestration platform. The main thing is we come from the telco world, and we can orchestrate anything on side of the network. So we've got hooks into virtually every IT security product and are developing it inside of there. And this is just in order to give you a workbench above the SIM so you can take actions and have your workflows signed up for it and be able to orchestrate things on machine speed. So I think that's pretty much it, right? Sorry, this is sort of a small pitch. So we also will allow for any sensor we're operating, and we allow for complex workflows. So a workflow inside of the security operations center is very trial and error often, right? So is this true, false? Okay, now we do a further investigation. Or you might want to put in another workflow inside of here in order to escalate it to another team and kick off another query, another project coming through. And I think that's it. Obrigado. Thank you. Short minutes.
Okay, thanks, Fox. Sorry? Você quer falar? So, como é que é? Diga.
Quero só fazer um resumo.
Okay. Okay. So, Jorge wants to make some summary in Portuguese.
Okay.
Ok, bom, deixa-me apresentar aqui, o Jorge está preocupado aqui com a questão de linguagem, então ele quer fazer um resumo em português sobre o que foi dito.
Bom, pelo seu relógio ali temos ainda 22 minutos. Bom dia a todos, obrigado pela presença. Meu nome é George, eu sou da CSG do Brasil e eu queria resgatar um pouquinho o que o Adriano colocou na apresentação dele, um pouco que o Bernd e o Juan também colocaram, as limitações que a gente vive hoje com respeito ao número e à velocidade dos ataques. Os eventos crescem numa magnitude grande e no ambiente corporativo e nas grandes organizações nós estamos falando de bilhões de eventos por dia no Brasil. Bilhões de eventos por dia. Desses bilhões de eventos por dia hoje, as estruturas de segurança têm condições de atender ou de tratar no máximo 7%. E desses 7% de ataque, só para vocês terem uma ideia, esse número é público, por isso eu posso falar, hoje existem organizações de grande porte no governo federal que tem cerca de... Hoje, cada analista de segurança trata 8.700 ataques por dia. Ou seja, não trata. Né? Ninguém em sã consciência tem condição de tratar esse número. Além disso, existe também a questão do fator humano, que o Adriano também colocou, que é a evolução do ser humano, que é um analista de segurança e que precisa se atualizar e precisa também estar ciente do que está ocorrendo no nível de segurança mundial. E não tem tempo. Ele fica fazendo hoje ações repetitivas e ações relacionadas a ataques ou a mesmo eventos que não têm significância. A mudança de um endereço, a mudança de uma porta, e isso acaba passando por ele. E toma tempo. Você vai falar, mas toma 1 ou 2 minutos. Sim, 1 ou 2 minutos. Eu falei de 8.700 por dia. 1 ou 2 minutos você já tomou muito tempo dele. Essa questão, essas duas curvas são exponenciais, uma positiva e outra negativa. Ou seja, do número de ataques e da velocidade de resposta. Portanto, surgiu no último ano essa tecnologia nova, chamada de orquestração. Essa tecnologia é muito recente é uma tecnologia que surgiu no mundo através da capacidade de otimizar, automatizar e orquestrar tanto a sensibilidade dos eventos, ou seja, você reconhecer os eventos, tratá-los, correlacioná-los e gerar uma contramedida de defesa ou uma contramedida de ataque, se for o caso. No caso, nós estamos falando aqui de defesa. Qual é o objetivo dessa nova tecnologia? Reduzir o tempo de execução de um patch na rede, que pode levar até 14 dias. Eu não estou falando de números imaginários, eu estou falando de realidade que ocorre hoje. As organizações brasileiras de grande porte, várias delas hoje levam, em média, 22 dias para gerar um patch de resposta a um ataque. Patch definitivo. Então, o objetivo dessa nova tecnologia é a redução dessa velocidade de tratamento e reação na rede, de dias para minutos. E da sensibilidade dos eventos, que hoje levam minutos ou horas, para segundos. Os tempos de resposta dessa nova tecnologia falam de segundos e minutos e trabalham em tempo de máquina. Essa é a grande mudança, ou seja, não é uma substituição das camadas de segurança existentes nas organizações, não é uma substituição dos analistas, muito pelo contrário, o fator humano é mais do que preservado e eletizado. O objetivo é transformá-los em analistas de verdade e não centros de resposta ou de leitores de relatório, mas, mais que tudo, executar tempos de respostas muito rápidos. Como o Adriano falou, a gente não sabe o que vem por aí, ainda tem algumas coisas que estão dormentes, algumas coisas que vêm atacando, portanto, o tempo é agora de se preparar com medidas rápidas de contra-resposta. Esse é o objetivo dessa nova tecnologia. A nossa organização, assim como outras, várias no mundo, vem desenvolvendo essa tecnologia há muitos anos. E a gente está trazendo essa tecnologia para o Brasil, apresentando as organizações acadêmicas, as organizações governamentais e também as empresas de modo geral. Pois não.
Essa tecnologia, essa orquestração...
Acho que é melhor falar aqui para ficar gravado.
Essa parte de orquestração, essa tecnologia, né, que vocês estão apresentando, tem toda essa velocidade em responder às questões relacionadas à segurança. Você falou parte de ataque também. Você também pode usar essa inteligência para daí contra-atacar.
Não é o objetivo num primeiro momento, mas sim o objetivo é de defesa, né? De execução de contramedidas de defesa. Quando eu falo ataque, na verdade, são as contramedidas de ataque que você recebe, né?
Tá, seria você fazer barreiras de alguma forma para impedir, tá?
Exato.
Porque a outra questão seria em relação à quantidade de falsos positivos que pode ter, né?
Exato.
Você começar a usar isso para daí ter um contra-ataque, você pode estar, na verdade, penalizando uma vítima.
Essa tecnologia, ela permite você criar regras de correlação que possam apoiar as regras de correlação existentes na inteligência cibernética que você tenha na rede, né? Seja no CIEM, seja nas outras ferramentas, para apoiar essa tomada de decisão que deve ser tomada sempre através de um ente supervisor ou gerenciador dessa rede do que ele vai fazer. E isso tem que seguir as boas práticas existentes.
Você está prevendo que pode ter um elemento humano nisso, uma decisão de que isso pode ser feito ou não.
O objetivo dessa tecnologia não é substituir o elemento humano, é eletizar a sua funcionalidade, a sua operação, que começou eletizada. No início, o supervisor de inteligência ou de segurança, ele era um elemento quase que um consultor, né? E hoje não, ele é operacional, ele fica lendo relatório e quando consegue ler, né? E executando medidas. O objetivo é resgatar isso, fazer com que essa plataforma, essa tecnologia otimize as ações e tornando o elemento humano eletizado de novo para pensar como? Proativamente, é o que você falou, ele pensar no que ele vai fazer, aquilo que o Adriano colocou, quer dizer, quanto tempo eu vou me dedicar hoje para pensar naquilo que pode vir a acontecer? Hoje ninguém consegue mais, é só respondendo medidas.
Desde que a plataforma não inunde esse indivíduo de falso positivo.
Por isso ela tem que ter inteligência suficiente para poder definir isso, ou seja, tem um certo analytics aí.
Bom dia, eu queria só reforçar a posição da colega, em que o falso positivo é uma das maiores preocupações no uso dessas plataformas inteligentes. Porque você demanda do analista a análise desses eventos de qualquer maneira. E você pode facilmente...
Como você falou, inundá-lo, né?
Inundá-lo de questões que ele não devia se preocupar, por exemplo.
Esse é o objetivo. A plataforma vai apoiar os sistemas existentes que hoje já deveriam fazer isso, mas que não o fazem por causa do volume que tem que ser tratado, apoiar esses sistemas para conseguir fazer com que esse nível de falso positivo seja tratado, pelo menos na sua grande maioria, de uma forma repetitiva e automatizada, e não inundando, usando o teu termo, o analista para fazer isso. Esse é o objetivo.
Jorge, deixa eu te ajudar aqui a fazer uma coisa. Acho que uma dúvida que aparece constantemente é essa questão de como um sistema automático pode tratar casos de falso positivo, né? Quer dizer, esta ideia de orquestração, ela, eu não sei os detalhes de como a Invotas implementa isso, né? Isso é uma coisa que eu vou falar daqui a pouco, que nós vamos fazer um projeto junto com eles, aqui em São Paulo. Mas, de qualquer maneira, a ideia conceitual envolvida nisso é de você ter um sistema que contém, que pode ser abastecido com regras de negócio muito claras, né? E que, então, tire da mesa do analista as questões óbvias. Quer dizer, na verdade, conceitualmente, pelo menos, esse sistema não deveria nunca dar um falso positivo. Porque a ideia desse sistema é o seguinte: ele identifica um rootkit. Quer dizer, os rootkits conhecidos, não existe possibilidade de dar um falso positivo na identificação deles, né? Eles têm uma assinatura, um footprint muito bem conhecido. Então você pode colocar no sistema uma regra de negócios que diz: olha, se aparecer esse footprint, você bloqueia esse texto. Acabou. Isso aí é uma operação muito simples, direta e sem risco de falso positivo. E a ideia é justamente essa que você levantou, né? Quer dizer, tirar da mão do analista o trabalho com essas questões óbvias e deixar na mão do analista aquelas que não são óbvias, que precisam de pensar, né? Porque toda a nova ameaça, ela precisa ser estudada, precisa ser analisada, precisa ser trabalhada. E o analista precisa ter tempo para isso. E a questão hoje que ocorre é que a gente gasta muito tempo com situações conhecidas, né? E aí falta o tempo para situações desconhecidas.
Eu não quero me alongar muito, até porque senão a gente vai ficar falando muito sobre o mesmo ponto o que eu queria, na verdade, esclarecer é que essa plataforma, essa tecnologia, ela dispõe de uma base de dados correlacional e que ela é dinamicamente alimentada e retroalimentada. Então ela tem uma base analítica que vai fazendo e vai ajudando e vai apoiando isso, vai crescendo e vai dinamicamente evoluindo. Exato.
Ô, Jorge, deixa eu já falar aqui só um minuto da coisa. Então, essa ideia da CSG em Votas nos pareceu, nós tomamos contato com ela, foi em fevereiro, Jorge?
Foi um pouquinho antes.
A gente começou já em janeiro. A gente começou a conversar. O Jorge nos trouxe isso em janeiro, nos pareceu muito interessante e é um produto inédito no mercado, né? Então, nós vamos fazer uma prova de conceito aqui em São Paulo, no meio universitário. O pessoal que traz os laboratórios que trabalham com segurança, o Adriano, está ali o professor Otávio, da BIM, eles estão envolvidos com essa prova de conceito, e a ideia
é que essa prova vai rodar na rede ANSP toda. Quer dizer, nós vamos instalar esse produto na rede ANSP para fazer essa prova de conceito, para ele ser amplamente testado. Então, todo mundo que desejar, dentro da rede ANSP, poderá participar desse trabalho, desse projeto, poderá testar todas as suas preocupações, e a ideia é virar do avesso mesmo o produto. Quer dizer, e nós estamos bastante empolgados com essa ideia, porque é muito raro ter empresas que se dispõem a fazer isso, né? Diz assim, ó, está aqui o meu produto, tá, nós vamos abrir isso aqui, vocês viram do avesso essa porcaria aqui para testar, ver se isso aqui funciona direito mesmo, faz o que a gente está dizendo ou não, em condições.
Eu espero que a porcaria seja boa.
Esse é o jargão, né? Então, esta é raríssimo a gente ter essa oportunidade. Então, a gente, em geral, a empresa ela não quer abrir nada, né? Ó, isso aqui é ASIS, né? Sempre o que vem escrito no termo de garantia. Né? Eu garanto o meu produto, eu garanto que o meu produto é do jeito que ele é. Tá certo? É isso que vem escrito na Microsoft, é isso que vem escrito na Cisco, em todas as companhias. Eu garanto que meu produto é o que ele é. Né? Se criar algum problema para a sua empresa, o problema é seu. Esse é o tipo de termo de garantia.
A gente também garante, mas a gente quer que vocês também possam provar.
Essa é uma oportunidade rara que a gente tem de pegar um produto comercial, virá-lo do avesso e testá-lo de todas as maneiras, testar todos os limites dele. Então, eu acho que isso vai ser interessante. Isso está aberto a todo mundo. Isso vai ser feito na rede ANSP. Ainda não está definido quem vai coordenar. Estamos ainda discutindo isso daí, talvez vire um projeto de parceria para inovação tecnológica em empresas da FAPESP, a gente ainda está vendo como é que vai fazer isso. Essas coisas, está todo mundo ocupado hoje em dia, né? Assim como os analistas de segurança, o pessoal de desenvolvimento está mais preocupado ainda, né? Mas enfim, nós estamos trabalhando nesse fato aí. Eu não sei se você quer continuar.
Não, eu queria agradecer de novo a oportunidade e apresentar essa nova tecnologia para vocês. Eu acredito que na próxima reunião da RSA a gente já vai ter mais dados para apresentar para vocês, dados concretos do que aconteceram. Na verdade, a nossa proposta nós estamos levando para, como eu disse, para o ambiente acadêmico, governamental e empresarial também, né? E o objetivo é garantir o produto, como falou o Lopes, mas também mostrar que realmente essa tecnologia funciona. Tem mais alguma pergunta, alguma questão, por favor?
Oi, sou nessa da USP. O que se pressupõe que exista de workflow, de governança no seu no trabalho do dia a dia da organização para essa automação funcionar? Você tem uma orquestração, ou vocês criam uma...
Essa é uma pergunta muito boa que a gente tem visto nas várias organizações, em qualquer nível. Você deve ter notado, não sei se você notou na apresentação dele, ele fala lá do Cyber Playbook, né? O Cyber Playbook nada mais é do que um conjunto de regras, de procedimentos, de padrões e de fluxos para você implementar na plataforma. Quer dizer, essa tecnologia permite com que você tenha um trabalho de consultoria, que tem que ser feito na organização, para ela implementar. Em outras palavras, se você não tiver da onde coletar os eventos, se você não tiver as regras de correlação que você quer implementar, essa plataforma não serve para nada. Essa plataforma só serve na medida que você vai automatizar fluxos existentes. Esses fluxos podem estar documentados, mas podem não estar documentados. E aí está a oportunidade que a gente percebeu em várias oportunidades que a gente se reuniu com empresas, que é a oportunidade deles implementarem essa criação desses fluxos. Então, o que eu quero dizer? Existem organizações maduras que têm procedimentos e fluxos pré-determinados, organizacionais, e existem outras que têm nada. e que foram implementando segurança à base da implementação diária e das necessidades diárias, sem um conceito claro de como fazê-lo. E estão vendo na implementação dessa plataforma a chance de implementar esses fluxos, esses procedimentos, esse Cyber Playbook.
Se a organização não tiver nada, vai ter que se reorganizar.
Exatamente.
Mudar um pouco a cultura.
Exatamente. A 27001, né, as certificações, tudo isso, elas mostram o caminho, mas as empresas precisam implementar. É igual a ISO, né? Mesma coisa.
E a ideia de você ter um analista, o pessoal que cuida do backbone, eles começarem a se especializar em segurança, ou o pessoal de segurança começar a interferir nos processos?
Essa pergunta é muito difícil. É muito difícil. É a mesma história, IT manda em rede ou rede manda em IT? Quer dizer, não dá para responder assim de bate-pronto. Acho que tem organizações onde a área de segurança hoje responde para a TI, tem organizações que a área de segurança responde para a administração central, tem organizações que a área de segurança está solta, pendurada em algum lugar, então depende da organização de cada empresa, não dá para responder assim.
Mas para a ferramenta,
Independe, a ferramenta precisa do Cyber Playbook. Mais alguma questão? Ok, muito obrigado.
Let me say thank you to CSP in Votas people. Where is Mark? I think Mark is there. Thank you, Mark. Thank you to the rest of the team. I was speaking Portuguese. I think you, Bernd, are trying to learn Portuguese. You already learned to say obrigado. So it's a beginning. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Pessoal, então, agradeço ao Jorge, que tem sofrido bastante com isso aí. Eu vou fazer uma observação sobre essa última pergunta, né? 10 anos atrás, mais ou menos, uma empresa de software hospitalar me veio conversar comigo para fazer uma consultoria sobre implantação, né? Porque eles queriam entrar aqui no Brasil com um sistema de informações radiológicas, né? Para pilotar a área de radiologia, um pouco mais de 10 anos, uns 14 anos atrás, a área de radiologia de hospitais, de clínicas e tal, né? E eles vieram conversar comigo porque o que eles perceberam era que a grande dificuldade deles venderem o sistema de informações radiológicas é que ele depende de um workflow, né? Quer dizer, você vai implantar um sistema de informações numa clínica de radiologia, ele só vai funcionar se você o carregar com o workflow da sua clínica, né? E, quer dizer, 9 de cada 10 clínicas de radiologia de São Paulo e do Brasil em geral tinham dificuldade de entender o que o workflow quer dizer, né? Esse é um problema muito sério. A gente tem uma cultura, tradicionalmente no Brasil, de fazer a organização do jeitinho, né? E com segurança cibernética, quer dizer, as coisas ocorrem muito rápido, né? Não dá para fazer na base do jeitinho. Está na hora, como mostrou o professor Adriano, está na hora da gente sair do jeitinho e passar para alguma coisa um pouco mais produtiva, mais eficiente. Então, pessoal, eu lembro a vocês, para encerrar aqui, que às 14 horas hoje, aqui mesmo, nós temos uma mesa redonda para continuar sobre esse assunto. Então a gente vai ter muito tempo aí para conversar sobre isso.